Let's have a look at the mark allocation, or my approximate mark allocation for this question number 1 Spectrum Limited. So first of all, the profit before tax note, I would think that for each one of these descriptions over here, you would get a half mark. So that's 2.5 for the descriptions of the various assets, income and expenses you disclosed in this particular note. Then as far as the calculations are concerned, the profit on sale and leaseback, that's a reference to working 1F. So if we go to working 1F, we will see that it's the deferred income. And if you remember correctly, the deferred income was the selling price minus the carrying amount, and that was times 1 over 3 years. Okay, so 1.5 marks for that calculation. As far as the interest income is concerned, the 195 was given, and then what we did is we only capitalized, if you like, 4 over 6 months of that. So that's also 1.5. Your interest expense was working number 3. So that's where we did that timeline. And to get the interest expense, you needed the payment, which was given, 0.5 mark. N, which was 3 times 2. I, which was 19,3 divided by 2, and the present value. So that's 3 marks. And then the interest of the current year was periods 1 to 2, amort, and you had to calculate the interest component. So in all, that's 1, 2, 3, 4.5 marks. And then of that interest, we capitalized period 1 on its own, multiplied by 4 over 6, less the 195, or less the 195 times 4 over 6 here. So that in total is 2 marks. As far as the depreciation is concerned, there are 2 figures. So 1E, first of all, was the depreciation. That was 650 plus 1.5 million, sorry, 6.5 million plus 1.5 million plus 34,000, and then to depreciate that, it was times 12 months over the remaining useful life. So 3.5 marks for that depreciation. And then for the depreciation on this other asset, it was your costs plus your borrowing costs times 1 over 10 times 6 over 12. Okay, so 2 marks for that. So in total then, this particular note over here is worth, let's just quickly, I wanted to change the color there. We'll just add it together like this. So it's 2.5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 16, 17.5 marks. All right, 17.5 for the profit before tax note. Right, as far as the PP&E is concerned, we've got the machinery owned and leased. I think you get 50/50 for that. Then the carrying amount at the beginning of the year, the amount transferred, the deferred income, the initial direct costs, the depreciation, and the closing carrying amount. So presentation-wise, 1, 2, 3, 4 marks. For the fact that the asset is encumbered, 1 mark. And then as far as the workings are concerned, the 6.5 million was given, so 0.5 mark for that. Transferring that to machinery leased, you'd get 0.5 mark. Then the deferred income was 8 million minus 6.5 million. The initial direct costs were given, but for knowing to capitalize them, I think you would get 1 mark. And then the depreciation, you've already got the workings marks for, so I think there, we're carrying that figure through, you'd probably get 1. So in total, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 marks. as far as the calculations are concerned. Then we've got the turbine, which had a carrying amount beginning of the year of nothing. We've got costs of 3.5, 2.5 and 2. Those were given, so a half a mark for each of those. And then the borrowing costs capitalized, that was your period 1-to-1 multiplied by 4/6 less the interest income for the period that was temporarily invested. Your depreciation, I think they would give you 1. Just let's remember that over there I've already given you marks for. And then your carrying amount at the end of the year, made up of cost and accumulated depreciation. The cost 8 million plus 384, and the accumulated depreciation, just the figure you depreciated for the year. I should think for carrying amount, in red here, for the carrying amount, the depreciation, the cost and the borrowing costs, you'd get half a mark each. So that's 2 marks in terms of presentation. And then we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5, and then possibly for differentiating the turbine, let's make that 7 marks for the rest of that note over there. Right, as far as the the finance lease is concerned, your terms and conditions, I think you're going to get the machine that was sold and leased back, the lease term, the terms of repayment, biannual and the amount, the first and last installments, and the effective interest rate. So for each of those, I think you'd get a half a mark. For showing the current and non-current portion, I think you'd get half a mark each. For the reconciliation of minimum lease payments to present value, for that heading, you get half, and then that's made up of those 3 components, along with 1 year, 2 to 5, and total. All right, so there we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 marks in terms of descriptions, etc. And then as far as our workings are concerned, the current, non-current portion, current, if you remember correctly, was periods 3 and 4, okay, half, and that was going to be the capital portion. The balance is the non-current portion for that particular period. Then for our recon of our minimum lease payments, we've got periods 3 and 4 over there, periods 5 and 6 over there. That's a half. The minimum lease payments, that's 2 payments times 1818059 and 2 payments times 1818159. The interest component, so we said already periods 3 to 4 interest, half a mark, periods 5 to 6 interest, half a mark, and then capital, half a mark, and capital, half a mark. For adding up your totals, I think it would have been a half, and a half. Right, so let's add that up. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5. Let's leave it at that. 9.5 marks for the number crunch over there. Sometimes I'm a little bit skint on giving marks there because UNISA very often uses an amortization table, so the table sometimes carries more marks for the interest capital split. So maybe there's another 2 over there for that interest capital split for getting your calculations there correct. Right, then we have the deferred income. You'd have to give a narrative as to how that deferred income came about. So selling price, carrying amount, that is how it came about, the difference between those two, which was 8 million and 6.5. Okay, so it's a half and a half. Then the amount amortized, I've already given you the marks in profit or loss. So that gives you a balance of 1 million, which then we've got to show current and non-current. And for the amounts, I should think you just get a half and a half. So in total, that is 4 marks, descriptions and numbers. I think that is it as far as part A is concerned. So let's add up there, just check how close we are. I think it was out of 58. So based on the method I gave you there, let's see what we would have got. plus 8, let's see, plus 9, turbine, plus, that is another 9, and then that's plus 17.5 plus 2.5. So I actually get a total of 61 marks there. So that I think is fairly realistic. Okay, so they would give you, it's out of 68, but let's just say that on offer we had 61 marks and you would be allowed a maximum of 58. That's not unrealistic at all. Sometimes there are a couple more marks on the mark plan than what was offered to you in the exam. So I hope that gives you a pretty good idea as to how the marks would be allocated. And you can see from that a lot of marks there just for the descriptions. And then as far as your workings are concerned, it's not that important that the numbers are right. What is important is that for every number that you've got populating your model disclosure, you've got a working to back that up. And then you're going to get a lot of those little halves that are on offer. All right, you might not get them all, but certainly you should be able to get enough to pass. So I really hope that little marking exercise is helpful, and it just helps you how to think in the exam. You got to think that I've got to get a product at the end of the day. I've got to get what it is the examiner is asking me. So if it's notes, present those notes very well, and then a reference working to back up each of the figure that populates those well presented notes. Right, the tax calculations, I know you guys normally don't like the tax, but if you have a look here, you will see that they mark through with the mistakes so much. So typically it's going to be carrying amount a half, tax base a half, and deferred tax on that at 28%. If it's a liability, half a mark. Turbine, half. This would have been a half, a half, a half, and deferred tax a half. The lease, a half, a half, a half. The deferred income, a half, a half, a half. And you have to understand there, they're marking through with your mistakes. So these figures over here don't have to be correct. They're just got to be the figures from your question. The only other thing that I think that presented us with a little bit of a problem was that exempt difference over there. And so for being exempt, I think they would have given you half a mark. And then for calculating it, it would have been a half, a half, a half, a half, a half, a half, giving you the answer that we had there. So in all, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and a half, which I think is spot on. 10 and a half marks, I think that's what it was out of. And then the last bit of the marking that we had to do was for this reconciliation, and there I suspect the marks would have been along the following lines. So we had the total segment liabilities 1, 1, those were given, the inter-segment loan 1, and then these also, each of these are marked through a half, 1, 1, 1 per what you had in your question, just for identifying they were liabilities that weren't in your segment information. The creditors given, that was a 1. The SAS figure given, that was a 1. The cash basis figure you took out, that was 1. And then I suspect for the descriptions, they would have given you a half and a half, or possibly a 1 and a 1. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which I think that was out of as well. All right, so fairly straightforward in the sense that it was very layout driven, and to have got yourself 4, 5, or 6 there, I think would have kept you out of any danger. What you can't afford to happen though is get all feeble and say, well, I didn't know how to do it, so I left it out. If you stick to the basics, there's stuff that comes in here time and time again. The intercompanies come in time and time again, and if you're on the cash basis, that creditors figure is going to be there just about every time. What was tricky here, I do concede, was that you had to pick up, there were other liabilities that you worked out in part A that weren't on the cash basis and therefore had to be included in here. All right, but a fairly good idea, a big question, lots of marks, and I think you can see the difficulty is where you become overwhelmed. As long as you don't become overwhelmed and you just deal with little bite-sized chunks at a time, and as you do a calculation, get yourself the marks, you can see there it is very much a mark accumulating exercise.